When we look at the history of the modern Arab world, from the fall of the Ottoman Empire to the present day, one troubling pattern stands out: the repeated loss of major wars. These defeats aren't just about outdated weapons or foreign conspiracies. Beneath the surface lies a web of cultural, societal, psychological, and institutional factors that have long undermined Arab war efforts. In this video, we explore the deeper roots of these failures: societal fabric, psychological traits, and behavioral mindsets and institutional structure. The goal isn't to assign blame, but to understand why Arab armies continued to lose, and how the cycle might finally be broken. As I said earlier, Arab military defeats aren't caused solely by weaker weapons or foreign interference. They're rooted in fragmentation, authoritarianism, colonial legacy, weak institutions, poor education, emotional decision-making, and a fatalistic mindset. These aren't isolated problems. They form a system that reproduces failure. And understanding these truths is the first step towards change. Victory doesn't begin on the battlefield. It begins with an understanding of each Arab mindset, what makes them individual and special, and how that understanding can be transformed into a national defense mechanism and force that is able to operate in today's unstable world and ultimately defend itself when it's called upon. Now, one of the most persistent and crippling issues for Arabs is fragmentation. Despite a shared language and religion, Arab states are deeply divided by tribe, by sect, region, and ideology. This disunity repeatedly sabotages attempts at military cooperation. A clear example is the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, when 7 Arab armies entered Palestine. Yet each acted independently. Jordan's Arab Legion, aligned with Britain, pursued territorial gains in the West Bank, while Syria and Egypt pursued their own conflicting agendas. Coordination was poor, command structures were absent, and distrust ran deep. The result? A disjointed and ultimately catastrophic defeat to Israel. This fragmentation isn't just between the various Arab states. It exists within them. Tribalism, nepotism, and sectarian favoritism dominate military hierarchies. Officers are often promoted based on loyalty to the regime or ethnic identity, not because of merit. This condition is further exacerbated when military orders are questioned and disobeyed by subordinates simply due to the fact that the senior officer might be from another tribe or sect. In such a fractured landscape, building a cohesive and disciplined military force becomes nearly impossible. Unity of purpose is critical to military success, but the Arab world has often gone to war in a state of division, fighting not just external enemies, but internal mistrust and competing agendas. Fragmentation turns every war into a number of mini civil wars by proxy, and no army wins that way. Another deep-rooted issue is the prevalence of authoritarian leadership. Arab rulers often concentrate military authority in their own hands, sidelining experienced commanders in favor of loyalists and cronies. This creates a culture where truth is dangerous and military strategy becomes a stage for personal ego rather than national defense. In 1991, during the First Gulf War, Iraqi generals were forced to wait for Saddam Hussein's personal approval on battlefield decisions, even as US airstrikes pounded their positions. Saddam's paranoia about coups meant independent thinking was punished. A 2005 RAND study confirmed that Iraq's army was crippled by a fear of initiative, with officers terrified to act without permission. This top-down, fear-driven structure is common across Arab regimes. In Egypt, Syria, and Libya, officers have often been more concerned with internal loyalty tests than external threats, and in dealing with them both professionally and in real time. Consequently, the chain of command becomes rigid, reactive, and slow. Authoritarianism also blocks reform. Leaders don't want strong, independent generals. They want obedient enforcers. Yet, modern warfare demands adaptability, decentralization, and intellectual flexibility, traits stifled under authoritative rule. When the battlefield changes quickly, a command structure built on fear collapses under pressure. I really do appreciate you taking the time and watching the Kandari Chronicles. Please do join our community by subscribing so that you don't miss out on any content regarding the Arab and Muslim history, identity, and modern condition. And if you really do enjoy the channel week in and week out and would like to support us even further, please do join us at our YouTube membership program as well as on Patreon. Thanks again. Much of the Arab world's military dysfunction is rooted in the legacy of colonialism. European powers carved up the Middle East into artificial states and built military forces designed not to protect nations, but to suppress populations. For example, in Algeria, the French colonial army recruited ethnic Berbers to police Arab populations, sowing long-term ethnic divisions. After independence in 1962, Algeria inherited a security model focused on internal repression, not national defense. Similar patterns existed in Iraq and Syria, where the British and French prioritized internal control over combat readiness. And since then, post-colonial armies adopted this mindset. They became tools for regime survival, not institutions of national sovereignty. Their foreign doctrines were imported wholesale, their officer corps politicized, and their development stunted by dependence on foreign models, and not newly invented versions that could thoroughly and intelligently translate Arab identity and traits into military prowess. This inherited dysfunction is rarely acknowledged, but is foundational. Most Arab armies, as they exist today, were never designed to win wars. They were built to control civilians. That legacy, more or less, still shapes how they function today. Arab military structures are often shaped less by doctrine and training than by regime politics. This has produced weak military institutions focused more on loyalty than combat effectiveness and dynamic initiative. Under Muammar al-Gaddafi, Libya's army was deliberately kept weak and fragmented to prevent coups. Instead of building a national military, Gaddafi relied on tribal militias and internal security forces loyal only to him. When civil war erupted in 2011, Libya had no cohesive army capable of defending the state. Units defected or collapsed within weeks. This is not unique to Libya. Across the region, military promotions often reward political reliability and yes-men over competence. Junior officers are discouraged from showing real and clear decision-making, professionalism, and that same old initiative, while critical feedback is seen as insubordination or attempts to outshine superiors. Thus, training can be intentionally superficial, and war colleges, when they exist, are usually outdated and ideologically rigid. Contrast this with the Israeli Defense Forces, where junior commanders are trained to make independent decisions, critique failures, and constantly adapt. That kind of flexible institutional culture simply doesn't exist in most Arab armies. Without putting all levels of the army in a position to make independent and intelligent decisions through empowerment and experience, an army becomes a hollow force, parading uniforms and tanks, but lacking the internal abilities needed for resilience and victory. Modern warfare, even back to over 80 years ago, required intense intellectual capital. Logistics, communications, systems thinking, strategic forecasting, and joint operations. And as the 21st century came, other fast-moving technologies such as cyber warfare and unmanned systems became prevalent. Arab militaries often suffer from a chronic lack of deep military education and a culture that discourages constant and intense academic advancement, as well as critical thinking at all levels and rank. A 2010 study in the Middle East Journal found that only 7% of military officers in Egypt, Syria, and Iraq had any formal exposure to military theory, logistics, or any historical case studies beyond academy-level basics. In Saddam Hussein's Iraq, military textbooks were rewritten to reflect Ba'athist ideology, and any critical analysis of past defeats like the war with Iran was banned outright. So no learning from past mistakes there. And if you apply the filter of authoritarian settings, intellectualism is treated with suspicion. Officers who ask tough questions or challenge doctrines are labeled potential threats. This creates a generation of military leaders trained in obedience, not innovation. In the lower ranks of Arab armies, most, if not almost all, have barely completed their secondary education. and continue to dwell as conscripts, resulting in a fake Arab force of quantity over quality. As warfare grows increasingly technological and complex, this intellectual void becomes more dangerous. An uneducated officer corps can't adapt to modern conflict. A military that suppresses learning will always repeat the same mistakes, no matter how much advanced weaponry it might own. After decades of military failures, a sense of fatalism has taken root across many Arab societies. Citizens and soldiers alike often expect defeat, even before the first shots are fired. A 2016 Arab Barometer survey across 10 countries found that less than 30% of respondents believed their armies could successfully defend the nation in a major war. In Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen, confidence was even lower than that. Among Arab youth, the future officers and soldiers' trust in military leadership was dismally weak. This psychological defeatism erodes morale, discourages innovation, and perpetuates mediocrity. Officers go through the motions without conviction. Reformers are either non-existent or are entirely ignored. And thus, cynicism replaces patriotism. And this point of fatalism shouldn't be considered as destiny, that Arabs are not made out for war. Non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas, regardless of political stance, have shown discipline and adaptability in embarrassing and defeating the IDF. Their effectiveness suggests the core issue isn't Arabness, but in the fact that when one achieves unity of cause and belief in mission, one can expect Arabs to be highly motivated, efficient, and effective in war. And our final factor is how Arab military campaigns have frequently been launched from a place of emotion, not strategy. Wars are waged to restore pride, respond to humiliation, or prove strength, reactive in nature, not to achieve clear strategic objectives that have been thought through and exhaustively processed over time. In May 1967, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser closed the Straits of Tiran, knowing it would provoke the Israelis. He did this to appease pan-Arab sentiment and serious accusations of cowardice, not because Egypt was militarily ready. In reality, Egyptian intelligence knew they were unprepared. Israel launched a preemptive strike, destroying most of Egypt's air force within hours, and the rest is history. This pattern of emotional overreaction is recurrent. The 1990 invasion of Kuwait by Iraq was driven less by a long-term strategy than by Saddam's resentment over oil disputes and perceived betrayal. The result? US-led coalition forces crushed Iraq in weeks. Emotion-based decision-making may rally popular support in the short term, but it leads to impulsive actions, strategic overreach, and devastating miscalculations. Military conflict is not therapy for national ego, yet too often Arab leaders have waged war as a way to reclaim honor, only to find themselves trapped in quagmires they were never prepared to win. And to break this cycle of failure, Arab societies must rebuild belief, not just in military capacity, but in the idea that reform and success are even possible. As stated earlier, Arab military defeats aren't caused solely by not having advanced weaponry, or subpar technologies, or even any conspiracy theories due to foreign involvement. They're rooted in behavioral and structural patterns that aren't conducive of successful and powerful militaries in the modern era. These aren't isolated problems. They form a system that reproduces failure. Understanding these truths is the first step towards change. And again, I say victory doesn't begin on the battlefield. It begins with a culture that values education, with leadership that seeks truth over flattery, and with institutions that reward merit over societal, sectarian, or tribal allegiance. This is the case not only for the Arab militaries, but also for the Arab condition in general. The military angle is a mere microcosm of a much larger problem that envelops societies in the Middle East. The Arab world has in its hands all the factors for success. The question is, will it confront the internal realities necessary to change its fate?